Well, it looks like our sign-ons are leveling off, so we'll go ahead and get started. And welcome. Thanks everyone for joining us on this little crispy fall morning here in the Berkshires. It's fun to see, but a little early, I think, for most of us. I'm Danielle Gonzalez. I'm the Director of Human Resources at Williams College. I also serve as the co-vice chair of the One Berkshire Alliance Board of Directors. So I'd like to welcome you all here and thank Christine Hoyt and Katie Brailsford for organizing today. They're also behind the scenes running the show and might answer any questions that come up in the chat. Our format's going to be just some introductions, I have some questions to ask our panelists, and then we hope to hear from you guys to have a bit of a conversation at the end. So we'll leave some time for that. Thanks again. Like many of you, our panelists are dynamic women in our business community, and they represent various industries who have provided essential services throughout the pandemic. So they've had to keep these organizations moving to provide these great services. They've had to pivot and employ some really creative approaches to their business so that they could serve their clients and customers, as well as maintain the health and safety of their staff. So I'd like to personally thank them and many of you for keeping our Berkshire economy and critical services moving in these really challenging times. So I'm going to ask our panelists to turn on their videos and we'll do some quick wave introductions. Hopefully you had a chance to read their bios a bit, but we have Pat Begrowicz, president of Onyx Specialty Papers. And then we have Janis Broderick, executive director of the Elizabeth Freeman Center. And Christa Proper, founder and CEO of Proper Connections, LLC. Thank you all for joining us and taking time in what I imagine are very, very busy schedules. You know, in terms of kicking off with a bit of an introduction, like I mentioned, you know, we know you've had to pivot and use some new approaches that are different in your business and meet really different needs. Maybe you could take a few minutes to share as part of your introduction and tell us, you know, what pre-pandemic life looked like for you in your office and how that might have changed for your employees and for you, whether that involved remote work. What has evolved and really shifted in the last several months? And anyone want to go first?
I'll go ahead and start.
Thanks, Pat.
My company's a manufacturing company down in Lee, and we basically run 24 hours a day for 5 to 6 days a week, have about 150 employees, and about half of those employees are on rotating shifts. So the nature of our work is that we really have to be here tied to our paper machines in order to produce what our customers need. Pre-pandemic, we were actually off to a pretty good start for the year. We were running pretty full. When the pandemic hit, we were deemed to be an essential manufacturer because of our role in a number of supply chains, but most particularly the automotive supply chain and medical. We do make medical papers. At the time that the state was shut down, our order book was full, so we had plenty of orders that our customers were asking us to produce. And our biggest challenge was to protect the workforce with really little guidelines at all at that point, other than kind of daily missives coming from the CDC. We had to figure out how do we address our employees' concerns and fears with being at work and continue to operate. We did send some of our non-essential workers home for a couple of weeks, but most everybody's job is not easily done at home in my business. As we headed into the summer, we started to see our order book decline. Many of our customers were shut down in different states, and our customers were beginning to be impacted. So we were forced to furlough all of our workforce, furloughed at least 1 week. Many of them had to furlough a number of weeks. And as we sit right here, our order book is still not full. We're down about 30% from where we were a year ago. But we have avoided any further furloughs since August, and we've had no layoffs, and we've had no employees contract the virus. So feeling pretty good for everything that's been happening.
For sure. That is amazing with a workforce that big. Thanks for sharing that. Who else could share? Janis, looks like you could share a little bit.
Sure. Hi. So For folks who don't know who we are, Elizabeth Freeman Center is the Domestic Violence and Rape Crisis Center for Berkshire County, and we also work 24/7. We have 3 offices in North Adams, Pittsfield, and Great Barrington. We also have staff that are cited in 4 courts to help with protection orders, and in 2 police stations to coordinate response with law enforcement, and in Kids Place for our specialized child services. And we also have a secure shelter in a confidential location. We have about close to 60 employees at this point in time, and we've been building over the year a real wide array of services that are adaptable to individual needs, trying to be very proactive. We serve about 2,600 child and adult survivors a year and about 600 youth and school staff through our violence prevention program. So we consider it essential as a first responder. We deal with emergencies, like I said, 24/7, through a hotline, through people who go to hospitals and police stations following an attack. And then we do a lot of counseling, advocacy, and we have a supervised visitation program. So things were rolling along great pre-pandemic. When the pandemic hit, we were determined to stay open, doors open in every one of our sites. Coronavirus, the steps we take to try to stop the spread of the virus are also the very kind of situations that lead to increased violence. And this was worldwide. I mean, countries were reporting 200 to 300% increases in calls for help because of the pandemic. And because of the isolation in the home and the closing of workplaces and all of that. So we quickly kind of rearranged. A lot of our staff had the same issues to deal with as everyone else in our community. People had medical conditions and weren't safe on site. People have kids, and we all know what's happening with parents and children and the uncertainty and the lack of daycare and the rotating school schedules. So the folks who were able to come on site, we just kind of rearranged and made sure everything was covered. But it's looking very different. We're scrambling. We're seeing a real increase in calls now with the violence more severe, the situation's more complicated, the options more limited. And so initially we were in a very reactive mode, I think, which is really not where we want to be. Just trying to work through the emergencies. And now we're really building back all of our services, using new technology that we hadn't used before, which, in some ways is really great. But in our work, really remote work is not the best format. So we really have to coordinate really closely between people on site and those working from home.
Absolutely. A multi-site and hands-on high contact work that's just necessary, really complicated stuff. That's amazing that you guys have been able to keep those services going. Christa, you serve a lot of different areas as well. Maybe you can share a little about yours.
Yeah, so we are a technology consulting company, and as you can imagine, technology has been a big part of how to run your business during a pandemic. So we do a lot of different technology services. So we provide consulting for a lot of enterprise accounts, for rural healthcare grants for hospitals. We provide IT and telecom support services. We augment staff for a lot of enterprise accounts, being healthcare and nursing homes. So prior to the pandemic, we have 37 employees that we employ in Massachusetts, New York, and Connecticut. And I would say we were a pretty traditional organization prior to the pandemic. 75% of our employees worked on site. We have an office in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, and in Bush, New York, and 25% worked remote. Being a technology company, telecommuting is a little bit easier, and we have a lot of positions that people can do their work remotely. But after the pandemic, we really kind of reversed that role. So now there's 75% of our employees that work remote and 25% that actually come into an office. What we ended up having to do during the pandemic, we were considered essential because we're a technology consultant company that supports a lot of healthcare institutions. We had to help them prepare for their employees to be remote and work during the pandemic, but we also had to shift and get our organization established in a way that we could help support all of our clients in that same environment. So we had a lot of twofold things going on where we're supporting our clients, but also getting our business up and operational in a way that we could do that. And, my biggest concern was protecting those 25% essential employees that had to go into the healthcare institutions and make sure that they were protected. So we put a lot of policies in place so that our telecommuters needed to get permission to come back to the office so that they weren't jeopardizing the folks that had to be on site to make sure that we're keeping them safe. We needed to put a new plan in place to basically sanitize our offices. We had to do a regular communication with our staff so that we could keep them abreast of federal regulations, state regulations, what was going on with our healthcare clients, making sure we were adhering to their rules and regulations, and then also establishing our own. I think the communication piece was the biggest thing for our organization. We wanted to make sure that we were always providing clear, concise, and consistent communication to our staff. And making sure that we were taking care of our clients as well and helping them get set up at home and in the environment that they needed to be effective and be able to do their work.
Thank you for that. I think we can easily assume a technology company is all remote and really flexible, and it's still just as challenging for you as well.
Yes,
as Pat mentioned, there was really limited information at the beginning. There's not a playbook for a pandemic response, at least not that I'm aware of, and I've looked. How did you approach this new strategy in your world of decision making and rapid response in ways when there's, not so much guidance? And how did it impact your employees or your clients in those ways? Just to have to, from a change management perspective and decision making, maybe you can talk a little bit about that, how as managers and CEOs as you approach that.
Well, I will say that it has been a constantly moving target, right? I mean, your work, at least our work, is also affected by what's happening out there in the courts and hospital and all sorts of other sites. I guess at this point in time, so we had to develop a lot of policies because we were not techie. So we had to develop a lot of remote work policies. We had to develop systems so that we could give people access to our secure database from home. We approved connections every morning. We shut them off at night. We had to, buy a lot of technology. We had to buy cell phones and services and Zoom. We could have folks communicating with our clients in a safe and confidential manner. And really, at a point in time, everybody's doing everything. Anyone who's on site. I don't know that I've done so much client work in my entire 12 years here as I've done in the last several months, because we all have to pitch in and do what's necessary. I mean, it's been really interesting over time, and it seems like it ago that the stuff are constantly just changing in terms of the requirements of exit stores, and we're one of the few shelters in the state for violence survivors that did not shut down testing, and creating constantly changing plans to be submitted is pretty overwhelming. So I think we're all just scrambling to keep up. The thing that goes on with a pandemic and this kind of work is that it's expensive. We had to, in order to keep our shelter open, for example, we had to start providing meals and basic needs so that we could maintain social distancing and cut back on outside exposure. Like Pat, we also haven't had a COVID case, and I'm going to knock on wood because it terrifies me if that happens. We started doing hazard pay differentials for our staff that were coming on site to recognize the increased risk. Just kind of dealing with all the concerns that people have working in this kind of situation has been interesting. I do not accept this as our new normal. I am hoping things will go back at least.
I completely agree with that sentiment. And your video or your audio broke up a little bit, but I think real key takeaways were you're doing a lot more hands-on work. Our work has just changed. Everything is costing more because we have to implement lots of new, whether it's PPE or protocols that we have. So absolutely. And yeah, accepting this as the new norm. This is a longer term or temporary norm. I completely agree.
It's interesting because I think one thing that as I was listening to Janis, what we were dealing with is fear. Our employees were afraid, and that's unlike any other problem we've ever dealt with. So a lot of our focus was on what do we need to do to address that fear. And they were worried about their own health, but they were also worried about taking, something back to their families. So we kind of really went right down to the basics, and we created a team of people that all those 4 people did was move around the facility asking people, what do you need to feel more comfortable? And that's where we implemented a whole lot of changes. And by the time the state came out with more specific regulations, we had most of those changes in place because, again, they were very focused on how do you get people to feel comfortable coming to work. We introduced a $200 a week appreciation. I don't want to call it bonus, but it was like that. But as opposed to calling it hazardous pay, it was, for balancing all the things you've got to balance and helping us to continue to supply our critical customers, we're giving you this $200 bonus every week. And we ran that for about 8 or 9 weeks during the peak of the pandemic. So it was all around how do you make our employees feel more comfortable.
And that's a great way to frame it, Pat, for sure. You obviously were proactive and created the safest possible work environment you could. So you don't want to call it hazard pay. That's a really lovely way to frame it. Very creative that way.
And Pat, we did the same thing, Danielle. I think that was our biggest concern. We're a technology company, so we didn't have the obstacle of getting people connected like probably most businesses did, because a lot of our folks had the technology they needed at home to be able to connect in. But I think it was the unknown and how do those folks that were essential and that had to come into these healthcare organizations, how do we keep them safe? How do we reward them or recognize the fact that they are putting themselves in harm's way, every day coming in to support our business? So we did the same thing. It was a bonus tool. We gave those folks a little bit of extra to say thank you for all your support, everything that you're doing. And I will say, knock on wood, we haven't had a COVID case either. And I'm very proud of that fact because we are in the nursing homes and the hospital and healthcare organizations on a basis. But we're really trying to make sure that we keep our employees as safe as possible and also follow all the regulations for all the clients that we serve. So I think communication was big on our part, is getting everybody on the Zoom meetings and talking to them every day at the same time every day. So the consistent time so that everybody knew at that time if they had questions, and we had a SWAT team that worked on making sure we were staying abreast of all of the things that were going on at the DC, at the federal level, at each state level that we serve, and then also our clients. And so we just made sure that, we didn't have all the answers, but we kept them, giving them a consistent message on what we were able to gather.
It's great information to have these team approaches in this way. As we've said, that we're not going to accept this as the new normal, but there's some pretty uncertain times still in front of us. What have you identified that are particular challenges for women in the workforce? And are there any creative solutions, whether you've employed them or you've seen it in other industries or areas, to address some of these unique challenges?
Well, I think I'll go first. I think, women in business, we have more than one job. So we have our careers. We're also a lot of times the head of our households, whether we want to be or not. And on top of that, now we're teachers, right? We have our young children that have to remote learn and, have to have the technology needed to be able to talk to their teachers online. And when you're a woman working from home, you're telecommuting yourself and you have your responsibilities. And on top of that, your son or daughter needs assistance in getting onto a Zoom. You're getting pulled in so many different directions. And I think it's such a challenge for women. It was a challenge before the pandemic, but now we've got all these remote learners at home. So we have tried to address that by doing a couple of different things. One is having some flexibility, right? So flex hours. If you need to take a couple hours off during the middle of the day to help your child or distant learning, then you can, work later, or you can do different hours. The problem with that is, they're working all day, whether with their job and also helping their child, and then they're working longer at night because they're trying to make up for the hours that they missed. So we've also been thinking about flex hours where we're shortening the week. So maybe you have longer days, but you have more days off so that you can kind of recoup and do some of your other responsibilities. Because our biggest fear is that we're going to lose a lot of talented women because they can't juggle everything. And I think that's a real fear. And I think we all have to collectively come up with better ways. We did have someone approach us about not flex hours, but flexible working, where two women in our organization would do the same job, but they'd split the hours. So it'd be 20 hours for one of them and 20 hours for the other. And they would have that same job, but they would be able to kind of share it with somebody. So we are entertaining that at this time as well. But we need to keep these talented women in the workforce. We've got to be able to help them juggle all these responsibilities.
Yeah, we have job shares used to be a thing, and maybe they're coming back now. Are Janis, are you and Pat seeing similar challenges in your workforce?
Well, sure. We have a pretty diverse workforce in all but gender. So 93, I don't know if I said this before, 93% of our employees identify as female. I would just kind of echo everything that Christa said, in terms of it's also a constantly changing landscape for parents, with the opening and closing of daycares, the decreased capacity, the rotating school schedules. It's just an incredible amount of stress. And quite a number of our employees are single moms. And so they don't have, a support system in the home. So we've been doing somewhat like Christa's been doing, is providing a lot of flexibilities in hours. We don't want to see people lose pay, right? We don't know how long this is going to last, but for people who are particularly, I think, we've been very flexible in hours in terms of, working whatever days, whatever hours you can, providing, we're hoping, that we will be the best trained staff in the state through this pandemic, because there's so many trainings available by Zoom that people can do at whatever hours they have available. I also think what we're seeing is that a lot of our staff are also needing to take care of, vulnerable relatives during this time. And so that also increases their risk and their responsibility. So again, the flexibility, but there needs to be better answers, because we are seeing not only our staff, but, you know, our clients who really are unable to continue working under these conditions. And it's very concerning.
Yeah, lots of pressures in different directions for sure. And
Yeah, my workforce is, interestingly, my workforce is about 80% male. And I will, and as the mother of 3 sons, I do have to say that I am seeing some of the fathers, you know, having to juggle the schooling, particularly with the dual career parents. So I do see folks, men in our workforce that are, you know, doing their part to help with the family responsibilities. The other challenge in our business is because it's a 24-hour business and, you know, one person, you need somebody on the side of that machine doing that job every hour for 24 hours. When we talk about giving people flexibility, that flexibility typically has a negative impact on another worker who now has to work 12 hours to cover the shift for the person who has to be home to do the schooling. So, you know, from our standpoint, we're trying to staff up and have more spares, backup people. But of course, that's a lot of cost. And then when you don't need them, they don't have as much useful work. So it is quite challenging. And I had earlier shared with the panelists on a bigger scale, McKinsey just completed a study that says that right now, 1 in 3 mothers, working mothers who have careers, are looking at leaving the workforce. And if they do that, the last 6 years where there's been very slow but steady progress in gender equality in a lot of C-level suites and higher executive positions in companies, that's all going to be wiped out in 1 year if 1 out of 3 women leave the workforce because of stress, because of overwork, and so it's going to be a very serious problem for our country in general if that's going to happen.
And when you shared that, Pat, you made also a really good observation that that lack of representation for the next generation workforce also has a long lasting and trailing impact. So that's a really important point. And I'm sure we can share the link to that study because you sharing that yesterday. I was reading that last night with my eyes a little enlarged. Very, very interesting read. You know, I'd like to be able to share some good news. You know, I think we started to touch on whether Janis mentioned that the professional development opportunities have become far more accessible with so much on Zoom and online web platforms. Are there other silver linings, anything you take away from this experience that you'll just keep for good, regardless of whatever that normal is or whenever we go back? What's the silver lining we can try to draw?
Well, for me, personally, what I've been able to slow down. I have a tendency of overscheduling myself and constantly being on the go. And because there weren't as many places to go to safely, what I found was that I kind of slowed down my pace and probably appreciated things a little bit differently than when I'm really overscheduled. So that is an intent that I have going forward, is I'm going to be much more careful with the scheduling of my time so that I have time to just relax and enjoy, you know, spent more time kayaking and walking and meditating, you know, that I never done before. So that's one personal learning for me.
That's great.
Look at his eyes.
Go ahead, Janis.
It's kind of not the same, but what I take away from this is Zoom. You know, even throughout this time, you know, I feel like I'm in endless meetings when things kind of cool out. I love this Zoom. You know, we mostly work through a statewide network, and there's lots of meetings, and generally it's all Boston-based. You know, they might meet in Framingham or Marlborough, but to go to, and I have a rule, if it's only a 1 hour meeting, 2 hour meeting, I'm not going. But, you know, you spend like 6 hours on the road. It takes you a half a day. It takes you a full day plus to go to these in-person meetings. And now that everyone's more used to using Zoom, you know, it takes an hour, it takes 2 hours. That's fabulous. And also I find, you know, we've been doing our groups with clients using Zoom for the most part. Our money school groups, you know, our Spanish-speaking family support group. And we've been providing people with Kindle Fire so they, you know, if they don't have other access. And it helps, you know, for a lot of people, it helps with that too. I mean, it's a viable option because, you know, transportation is such an issue in this county. I mean, internet is too, so it doesn't help everyone, but transportation is huge. And just, you know, taking time out, you know, folks have the same problem as I do, traveling to a meeting. And so we have found that even though the workshops are different, it does provide access to different populations that might not have been able to maneuver that timing. So I think we'll continue that too. I've also found through the pandemic that, you know, people are really very caring in this community. I mean, I don't know, we just did our walk a mile. We did it virtual. We had no idea what to expect. And we had focused on messaging, you know, and reaching underserved populations and tightening up partnerships. But it was incredible. I mean, the number of people who came out, who actually walked, or who just fundraised and did videos and postings. You know, people are pulling together, not only at EFC, but I think throughout the community. And the other thing we learned here is we're more tech savvy. You know, we had to really push, you know, with Walk a Mile, using social media, which was not, you know, we don't have a development person, we don't have a communications person. So we had volunteers that were helping us, and it's just really broadened our reach. And one of the most important things for us is to get the word out that we're here, right? And so people will call us and feel comfortable calling us and working with others, because we can't do this alone, clearly. So social media has been a real experience, and I leave it to, you know, people who know how to do it, but it has really broadened our reach. And so that will continue after the pandemic ends.
That sounds like some really dynamic change. That's really exciting. And from an observer, Walk a Mile was fabulous from Instagram. It seemed very successful.
Instagram now.
How about you, Christa? Any silver linings or takeaways?
Yeah, you know, not to be repetitive, but the telecommuting, I think we've learned as an organization how effective that is. And we will continue that after the pandemic, and flexible schedules so that we can continue to support young women and men with families, making sure that they have a work environment that works for them and their families. So I think those are all things we're going to take away. We put a lot of policies in place that I'm excited about, that we could really use for a lot of different situations outside of the pandemic that we're going to continue to use. And just for me, the commute, I was driving 3 hours a day, and now I have time to take a walk or a jog or to be a little bit more healthy. My mother-in-law recently moved in with us, and so now I'm able to take care of her a little bit more effectively than I would if I was working full-time and commuting. So I think it's that balance, right? That life-work balance that none of us are good at. And I think we all should take the playbook. You know, you never know what's going to happen, what's going to impact us and our families, and family first. Our businesses are important, but we have to continue to take care of each other and take care of ourselves. So I'm hopeful that's something good that comes out of all of this for all working women and men.
That's really great and really promising, I think, for what it says of our community, the care for others. And these are common themes as we have this conversation in HR professional groups at the One Berkshire board. You know, we're really hearing the coming together and this sort of universal problem that we're in, even if we're all approaching it with different industries and customers and clients in mind. there's a real coming together and sense of community, which is really, really promising. I think this is a great time to turn to some questions. If we have any that people can start putting in the chat, or I don't know if the raise hand functionality here. And we can maybe just have a little conversation to see if, well, someone wants to break the ice with the first question. You know, you see any challenges with providing this flexibility in your workforce? Has that had impact on morale with others? Is it a long-term solution? You know, how is your staff feeling about this?
I think our staff really misses getting together. We do, you know, part of our goals are to do a lot of community stuff, fundraisers, and we do a lot together. We have, you know, we do different fundraising things together, and we aren't able to do that with the pandemic. So we tried to do it virtually, but it's not quite the same. I also think we miss, you know, being able to whiteboard stuff all together in a room and share information. And I think a lot of my employees are missing that. So we are trying to address that right now. How can we keep the morale going and the camaraderie and the teamwork when we're all remote? So that is a challenge for us.
And for us, we don't have any people remote, but because of all of our safety precautions, we aren't getting together. We even do Zoom meetings where people participate. They're all here at the facility, but they're participating by Zoom just to continue to maintain social distance. And we've really started to ask this question, you know, the things that made Onyx, Onyx. We've lost some of those interpersonal connections, the collaborative idea building, and we're actually focusing a lot of our effort right now talking about how to get some of that back while still maintaining social distancing, relationships with customers. That's a big part of who we are, and we can't go and see them. So trying to figure out how are we going to keep those relationships going. So we don't have an answer to that yet, but it is something right now that is the top of our list for focus as we go into the new year.
That's really interesting. There's a values and, you know, company culture conversation prompted by this. That's really interesting.
Yeah, and we're kind of experiencing the same thing that Pat and Christa were talking about. I think, you know, the work that we do is pretty stressful, and so we have always done a lot of kind of gatherings and just to develop, you know, teamwork and relationships. The pandemic has made everything pretty faceless and isolated. I mean, this will be the first year, I think, in 9 years that I won't have the holiday party where we, you know, staff and board and volunteers and friends come to the house and we, you know, eat and have merriment, which is a big loss. And when people do leave or people do leave the organization, you know, we can't send them off properly in my mind. It's just kind of a rock, you know, and yeah, it's difficult.
Absolutely. And maybe, you know, some of the questions coming in, I see a theme of like thinking ahead of what post-pandemic world might be and workforce. How do you see your roles changing? You know, and it sort of ties into the things I think we've talked about, and maybe it's your roles or the workforce changing. There's questions around, will virtual meetings just stay? Is this going to be for years? Have you guys put any thought into that yet?
I think, you know, one of the things that's interesting about these virtual meetings is I'm on a number of boards that typically meet in Boston. And one of the things that these virtual meetings has done is opened up opportunities for board membership to people from Western Massachusetts now, because I was one of the few people that would get in the car and drive out there to meet. So I think, I know, for instance, Associated Industries of Massachusetts is planning to continue to do a lot of their activities via Zoom or Microsoft Teams in order to allow more diversity on their boards, which, you know, particularly geographic, but other forms of diversity. So I think that, you know, I'm going to be seeing a lot of of the activities that I have traditionally done are probably going to stay different. They may not require as much in-person participation.
And Christa, it sounds like you were saying you might stay a lot more in this virtual world now that you guys have demonstrated it.
I absolutely think we will. I think our business will change forever as a result of this pandemic. I think we'll have more telecommuting, more flexible work schedules. We're going to continue down that path. And even, like I said, the commute time, you know, if you can do a meeting remotely and it's as effective and you get things done, why would you want to commute for 3 hours? And why would you want your employees to do that? You know, as long as they can be effective and complete the job function, I don't see any reason why you make them come back to the office.
Sure. We have a question around the Massachusetts travel restrictions and ban. Has this impacted your business? Is it impacting your staff? Are they choosing to travel to high-risk areas? Anyone can speak to that?
This is a constant challenge. So far, basically, I've just appealed as much as possible to people's common sense. I can't forbid them to go where they're going to go. We've kept most of it at bay, but I think it's becoming harder. People are, you know, kind of itching to go. You know, we've put some rules in place that basically say, okay, if you're going to do that, you can't come back to work till you have a clean test, or you have to quarantine, and you have to use your own personal time to quarantine. So, you know, we put some guardrails in place to make sure that people think very, very carefully and seriously about their decision to do that. But yeah, I think it's going to become a real challenge as we head into the holidays now.
Yeah, kind of the same here. We've, you know, if we lose someone working on site, it's a big loss for us, either in an office or our shelter. I mean, our shelter has to be staffed 24/7. You know, people have been really cooperative and responsible. I mean, we have a very dedicated crew here, and for that I am totally thankful and honored to be here. The other issue that comes up, though, in our work is that, you know, survivors may frequently have to flee out of their home community, which may be another state. And so, you know, we either work with those folks to kind of safely resettle quickly. We've been using a lot more motels, you know, not only because shelters are full or at limited capacity, but also because of the level of emergencies that we're seeing. And if we do take someone in our shelter, we have developed protocols to kind of quarantine. I'm not, you know, we have to be so careful, and I'm not convinced with all the science that just having a negative COVID test within 3 days of coming home is really an indication that you might not be, you know, put others at risk. And so we've kind of combined that with quarantining, and people know that.
So lots of protocols having to put in place just for that, for sure. Here's an interesting question that came through is, you know, obviously you guys are doing lots to protect and advance your companies and your workforce. Are there other ways that you're providing meaningful content in the community to help others get through this? I mean, this is kind of core to your work, Janis. So thinking about how you've communicated even broadly, it sounds like a lot of social media, other things that you could share.
So, yeah, I mean, it really has, since the pandemic broke and ongoing, just trying to get the word out there that our doors are open and that people can call us. So we've been doing, you know, not only a lot of press and social media, mailing, constant contact with police and courts, you know, to figure out ways that we can, you know, help people get to us. I mean, for example, the number of protection orders that have been issued in this county have dropped dramatically, and it's not an indication that there's less violence, but it is an indication that access is limited. And our folks can't be in the court because, you know, we're usually sitting in that court or able to just run over to the court when someone comes in needing help. That can't happen now because of restrictions on who can be there and how many. People are going to the court doors and they're being handed papers through the door to be completed outside. And they have to connect with a hearing telephonically initially. So, you know, trying to just get information out there has been absolutely critical. We leave phones everywhere, not only so people have safe phones so they can call for help and not get tracked by an abuser, but also to call us. And I forgot the question.
No, it's exactly it. You know, what are we doing out? I mean, what we're doing in our communities to broadly. I mean, your work is just so impactful. I mean, those are really great examples of how challenging it is and what you continue to do to make sure it's getting through the community. And you know, that's something we have tried to do at the college when you're so integrated with town and college, and that those boundaries are blurred. Trying to make sure our signage blends into community signage. It's nothing like the challenges you're facing to make sure that folks get access to that information, for sure.
Danielle, we did something as a company, not nearly enough, but we did a fundraiser and tried to raise money for the students who didn't have broadband access. So you know, our employees did that and our company matched it, and we donated it to Pittsfield Public Schools to get access to some of those children who didn't have broadband services to access their online learning. So we've tried to do some of those things in training on Zoom, some public training on how do you use Zoom, how do you do use some of these technologies. But we're a small company, we're trying to do more, but those are the things that we've done as an organization.
That's great. We have a question from someone who's recently made a job transition or career transition and thinking about networking in this virtual environment. You have any tips or suggestions as to how to break the ice and do it in a virtual way? In some ways it seems more accessible, in other ways maybe not, because it can be impersonal, right?
Well, it's interesting as someone who gets a lot of cold calls from people that, you know, want to, you know, reach out and connect for whatever various reasons. Most of the time they're trying to sell me something. I actually feel like I've contracted my time where I've said, you know, no, I'm not taking all those calls. So I would think from somebody who is trying to network for their business, that's a higher barrier to break through. You know, I can't possibly give advice because then I'd be telling everybody how to break through my barriers, and then my barriers would be non-existent. But I do think at a certain point, what I think about more is how do we create that social network of working women who have that opportunity to kind of say, okay, how are things going for you, and how are you handling this? And you know, for a position like mine where I pretty much have to be on all the time in public, I rely very heavily on certain of my friends that I can just completely let my guard down, and they can be a very important support network. And I've made the choice that even with social distancing, I'm going to maintain those connections as safely as possible, even if it's walking outside, you know, to have those moments of connection, or, you know, wearing masks while we're together. It's worth that extra effort to create that social network for myself. So I guess it's a risk I'm choosing to take because of the mental health risk on the other side.
It's a really good point about the mental health risk and staying connected, for sure. I know for me personally, there are former colleagues that are all over the country that the accessibility of the Zoom is like, I should set up regular meetings with them and get that back in my life. So it really has some ways been accessible, but you're not wrong. The calendar and scheduling is still a challenge there. We have a real operational question presented of how you're doing daily screenings for your staff. What does that look like when employees arrive? Are you leveraging technology for self-reporting each day? Pat, you certainly have a lot of folks on site. I don't know if you have some protocols like that.
Yeah, we're required. There is a requirement for manufacturers to do a measure of screening. Our screening is self-screening that employees do and fill out a form, either online or for some of our shift workers, they'll do it in paper before they start the shift. That just verifies, you know, that they don't have a temperature, they don't have symptoms. we also handed out thermometers because when we were doing this self-screening, it became evident that those people who don't have young children, most of them don't have thermometers at home. So we bought a whole bunch of thermometers and gave those out to people so that they could measure their temperature. And that's worked for us. And then we do periodic audits to make sure that people are completing those. So that's how we do it. We just could not find a way that we could actually measure people's temperatures and all the confidentiality issues involved with that. We felt it was better and it was allowable under the state regulations to do self-screening.
Same thing with us. We do self-screening. We actually lock our door because we want to make sure we're in control of who's coming into our office space. They have to, sign a log that they're there. They do their self-testing. We have hand sanitizer that we ask them to use before they go into their office space, and then they also sanitize their space when they leave at night. And then we have cleaners that come in. So those are the things that we're doing.
Great. Janis, you have a workforce that's in really high contact with individuals in all different spaces. It must be much more challenging in that sense.
Well, I guess it is. I mean, we also do self-screening. I think what, our work sites are kind of small, right? So it's not like, in a factory or whatever where there's many people in spaces. So, we do a lot of trainings with staff on use of PPE and safety precautions. We did one for, and we should do ongoing ones with guests in our shelter. And yeah, we just have a policy. If anyone feels sick, they should, call their supervisor and probably work from home. I mean, it's concerning now that we're going into the winter season, right? The flu season, the cold season, the everything season. So, yeah, for staff and for our clients, I think that's going to be a huge issue.
That's right. And we're at the peak of it all colliding and see our numbers creeping up in Berkshire County and have to maintain this vigilance that we're all discussing. There are only a couple more questions in the queue, and one I was around whether we have any data to support women leaving in the workforce here in Berkshire County, and I'm not sure that we have that. That's an interesting question to take back to One Berkshire leadership if there's any way to learn more about that. And another theme that's come through is around whether women might feel pressure to take less maternity leave in this new environment and care of bonding of a child as new paid family leave programs and acts come into play in 2021. So that'll be an interesting thing to keep an eye on. Obviously, it'll be protected as it has always been protected in Massachusetts, just that the number of weeks has actually increased. But it does speak to a pressure, right, in someone's career. And I know in my workforce, some women will even take it intermittently to return a little quicker and draw it out a little bit. So important conversations to keep on our radar as we see the new law come into legislation next year and how that looks in our workforce. So really interesting topics to keep on our One Berkshire radar for sure. I know we just have a few minutes left, but any closing thoughts or well wishes as you guys keep moving these organizations forward in these really critical times. So I want to give you the last word.
Well, the one thing I would say is particularly for women who are young mothers. So I'm well past that. My kids are grown, but actually over this pandemic, I did become a grandmother. And we have also had a couple of people at work recently have babies. And I guess the one piece of advice I would give for working women that have children, particularly at this time, but really all the time, is accept help and lose perfection. When I look back on the number of times I stressed out when I had little kids that my house wasn't clean enough. And, this is now the third night this week we've had hamburger helper. Lose the perfection. At least they're getting food. And I think that there's this, everybody always talks about doing it all. And I know I did not ask for enough help. That's a weakness I have. But I would really encourage, because this burnout issue is very, very serious. and it's particularly aggravated during this pandemic, which we really don't know how long that's going to last. So I think accepting the help from wherever it comes from is really important.
Well, go ahead, Janis.
No, go ahead.
I think self-care, you're right. I think I'm also at a different part of my life where I don't have young children, but now I have an elderly mother-in-law that I am taking care of. And I think one of the things we always do is do for everyone else, especially women in leadership and women in business. I think we have to do more self-care. We need to take care of ourselves, embrace this telecommuting and do more remotely, and give yourself some time that you need to do the things that you need to do. And you don't have to be perfect for everybody, not for your family, not for your workforce, not for the community. You do the best that you can and make sure you take care of yourself.
I think both those comments are brilliant. I think it's really important to have support systems, and yeah, we're always most critical of ourselves and judging ourselves, and this idea of parenting like we're going to be the perfect parents, there's no such thing. I also believe that people go through cycles in their life, when they're able to do more or less, focus on different things, and it's not a permanent situation. And so I think, also taking a long-term view of life, and if you have a career path or whatever, it's yeah. I couldn't do this job if I had kids. I know this, but I loved my time with the kids. So anyway, just kind of looking forward, looking long.
Oh, these are fabulous closing comments, and I don't think just in pandemic times, like as women leaders all the time. This is really fabulous as a reminder of how important this network and relationships and coming together and having these dialogues are to lift each other up, to remind each other about these things. So thank you so much. I think there's a final question that is being answered, that yes, this is a recorded webinar, and that will be available. So thank you so much. And thank you to Katie and Christine behind the scenes, and Janis and Pat and Christa. Thank you so much. And you guys have a safe and happy Halloween.
Thank you, Danielle.